This session will be recorded, and our presenter today is Darren Swift from Zerto. A few housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, my name is Christina Bauer. I'm a product partner marketing manager here at Zerto. I will be the MC for today's event. In terms of the housekeeping items that I mentioned before, if you wish to ask a question, you can use the webinar control panel on the top right of your screen and either enter that question into the questions tab or the chat tab. There's also a handout there for you to download and peruse while we go through the webinar. And we will, everyone will be in listen-only mode, but we will be answering questions as they come up, so feel free to ask them. And we will definitely have time at the end of the session for questions and answers. So with that introduction, I'd like to hand it off to Darren Swift. Thank you, Darren.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Christina. So my name's Darren Swift. I'm a systems engineer here at Zerto. And what I just want to walk you through today is how we're going to recover from ransomware in minutes. Now, the aim of this presentation is to give you a little bit more information around ransomware, how it actually works, and some things that you can do today to actually stop ransomware. And then at the end of this, we're just going to show you in the unlikely or in the unfortunate event that you are struck by ransomware, how you can actually recover. So ransomware seems like it's been around for a long time, and it's actually been around since May 2013, when the first strain was actually found. But you'll be surprised by the figures, and I'm sure it's come up in your conversations with your colleagues and peers that, you know, what are you doing around ransomware? And it's becoming more and more prolific. So in Q1 2016, and this is taken from the official reports, they raised 209 million. In 1 month alone, there was 56,000 infections, and that's 1,806 per day. I often liken this to, it's derived by ransomware. These come over email attachments, web links, etc. There is no complex hacking in this. It is just distributed by large distribution servers dotted around the globe. There have been numerous strains of ransomware. There's over 200 families, and bear in mind my figures were taken in Q4 last year, and that doesn't account for the Kaspersky one that was also found. So the problem with this is they're creating so many different versions of these viruses. It's hard for the software and security companies to keep up in order to consistently combat them. It's not like these ransomware people are delivering release notes online so that you can check what the latest features are. Unfortunately, it's showing no signs of slowing down. So 50% of organizations were affected, and it's 600% growth from the start of last year to the end of last year. So that shows you the prolific nature of this ransomware. Now, bearing in mind my 209 million figure from the previous slide, only 1 out of 5 companies actually admitted to paying ransomware. So 1 in 5 got them 209 million in 1 quarter. That's better than most businesses. It is now the #1 security threat globally, and only 4 out of 5 people were confident that they could backup could solve this. Less than 50% were actually successful through that means. And that is due to a lack of testing and also preparation. You've got to be prepared for when ransomware actually hits so that you know what to do in the eventuality of when it hits. Hopefully I can give you some pointers throughout this webinar just to take back to your organization. If you've never seen ransomware, it's a message like this which is displayed on the screen. This one's CTB Looker, so this is quite old now, but it is still in circulation. This was found in around 2014, 2015. And essentially, the payload is delivered by an email. Back when CTB Looker was prolific, around 31% of all CTB Looker was delivered by email. The payload is then delivered and downloaded into your machine, and the end point is it starts to encrypt your files with certain file extensions and displays a ransom message to you stating that if you do not pay within the allotted time, then you will be permanently locked out of your data. Now I'll get into a little bit more of how this works at the moment. This is just a brief overview. Now, ransomware is big in the news. If you type ransomware into Google, then you are going to get a whole heap of results. The most recent ransomware stream which has come around is actually quite a quirky one. It's an education one. So it locks you out of your files and then gives you documents to read on how you actually to secure your infrastructure, and if you don't read them in the allotted time, then it locks you out. There is even ransomware as a service now, so you can actually download and distribute this. You don't even need to know or write the code. You can just download and distribute this however you would like. So a recent example, now this is going back to September last year. Now I like this example because it just shows the effect of what ransomware can do in an organization. Now in this case, a ransomware payload was delivered in an attachment. It infected a computer on the internal network, but then it starts to spread to others. So ransomware's main job is not to just infect that end client, it's to spread across your organization. And it's looking for certain types of files, so most of your Words, PDFs, text files, etc. And it's starting to spread across all the shares that that end terminal can see, and that is its job. Any terminal or any drive that that terminal has access to with edit permissions, ransomware is going to go and infect. More scarily, ransomware is also now being tuned to identify backup targets within your network. So if this got onto the wrong PC, then it could actually go and start to encrypt your backup. So with the case of this one, there was a computer infected on the internal network and it started to spread to others. At this point, they know they've been hit by ransomware, but they don't know how badly they've been hit. So what do? You start to rip network cables down and start to isolate the source as quickly as possible. Now the interesting point around this one was this company is not a small company, I can't mention them. It's not like they exactly didn't have security. They had the top line security, many different vendors, very good firewalls. But this was a day zero attack. Only 3 out of the top 50 companies who specialize in security knew this strain even existed. So what happened to the customer? So due to the fact that we had to go and isolate all the source and control the spread, then their internal systems went offline. Billing was delayed, email was down, accounting system, and all communications were offline. The one saving grace that this company had was all their payments and customer information was actually hosted by a third party, and that wasn't infected. They was actually down for several days, so all their systems were offline. The cost was yet to be calculated, or it's not being released, but the biggest problem with this was because there was a public-facing company. They had to explain to their user base exactly what had happened and then try and encourage the customers that their data was actually safe. So I'm going to concentrate on Crypto Wall 4. Now, Crypto Wall 4 came around the end of 2015. It's seen different variations throughout its time, but it's a particularly advanced strain of ransomware. And I just want to show you exactly what this can do in your environment. So, the victim is compromised. This could be a phishing scam. It could be a link in an email. It could be an attachment, as we've seen in the previous example. The binary is then downloaded and executed, so it's on the user's PC. It's been downloaded, we start to execute, and it's actually injected into the Explorer.exe on Windows. Now, ransomware only infects Windows. At this point, it's trying to make itself persistent and copy itself into the app data folder and run a registry key. It then elevates itself into SVC host, and at this point it starts to delete all the VSS shadow copies that you have on that machine. It is trying to strip down and give itself as much permissions as possible so that you cannot recover via any other means. Now, the interesting thing with this is with CryptoWall 4, the calls it makes down to the API, they're not in strings, they're not in tables, they are all encrypted. So this is how much of an effort these ransomware organizations are going to circumvent your security measures and detection measures. At this point, it's going to go to its command and control server. Now, if the command and control server is online, it is going to download an RSA public encryption key. And it is then going to start encrypting your data with a random AES encryption key from that C2 server. The RSA public key is then used to encrypt the key that was used, and all your data is then locked, and you get the file extensions like we see here. At this point, once a ransomware has been completed, it will display a message in three formats, in a PNG, a text, and a HTML. And they will all display the message like we've seen on the previous slides with the CTB locker stating your files have been encrypted, you have to pay a ransom. Ransom is usually a Bitcoin or around $300. So can it be broken? Now, various different companies such as Kaspersky over the last few months have released decryption keys. The latest story around Kaspersky was they released an decryption key, and within 2 days there's a new strain of ransomware that circumvented it. My whole point around this is we're constantly chasing what we don't know. All we can actually do is reverse engineer what we actually do know. So in the short term, no, CryptoWall 4 can't be broken. Without the decryption key, which you're never going to get because it's on that control and command server, you are never going to get it back. It's not perfect, but I would recommend that firewall and IPS systems are up to date because CryptoWall 4 has a unique packet ID. If you can block that and it never goes to its command and control server, then it will never encrypt. You will need to rebuild that machine because it will be infected, but none of your files will be encrypted. So it just goes in a basic install loop. Doesn't matter which reports you read or subscribe to, they all say the bottom line is have a good recovery strategy. And that is, paramount to how you actually need to recover. Now, unless you want to go on the Tor browsers or on the dark web, there is a Google-friendly ransomware simulator. It's called ShinoLocker. And what it does is it just allows you to demonstrate within your organization the effects of ransomware. So I run it in Workstation, just put some dummy files on there and let it run. It provides you with a decryption key, doesn't ask you for bitcoins, etc. It is purely an educational tool to show you exactly what ransomware can do in your environment. Because we've all got file shares with data on them, and that's what ransomware's main target is to lock you out of that data. So it's shinolocker.com. You can just simply download it and have a run of it. So what can we do with stopping infections? Now, we've not built this slide ourselves. We've talked to various different customers, partners, and also security vendors to try and give you some best practices of what we can actually do today to stop infections. And when we think about the attack vectors that we have within an organization, we have the internet, bring your own devices, USB pens, and obviously emails. Then we have our users who also have access to our networks and disks. So how do we protect these three categories? So Lucky12345 was the person who started ransomware back in 2013. And little known fact around ransomware, ransomware will not infect a Russian operating system. So if you're running Windows with a Russian operating system, it will not infect it. I can't tell you to obviously switch all your operating systems to Russian, but one of the things I've seen companies do is start to filter web traffic by geo. So stop users being able to access websites that they may have no business or want to go to. Because don't forget, ransomware could just be a pop-up on a web page. If one of your users is on the wrong web page, then they could get ransomware. Secure your entry points. I think this, is an old one. Secure people from bringing USBs in, plugging them in, etc. If you do have bring your own devices, there is a great freeware product called Packet Fence. I've seen a couple of universities start to use this, whereby they have large amounts of students who are bringing, everything from mobiles to tablets to NAS drives that they want to put onto the network to get at their data. Packet Fence allows them to be registered, brings them on, but it also quarantines them whenever it finds anything malicious on there. And it's freeware, so you can try it today. No web access on virtual machines. If we go back to the start of my presentation where I was mentioning that ransomware's main objective is to infect beyond your terminal to do the maximum amount of damage, if you're allowing users, I'm guilty of it myself as an administrator, just quickly accessing the web, turning off IE's recommendations and downloading a file. Restrict that completely, because you do not want to risk your server infrastructure being infected, because that will have far greater reach than your clients and users. Train users in IT. The example at the end of this presentation just shows how one of our customers went through ransomware. The first time was, all hands on deck, panic stations trying to work out what had gone on. But it's about training users. Easier said than done, but just simple things like explaining what ransomware is, explaining the messages, how to report it, etc. Keeping antivirus and malware completely up to date is paramount. As from my Kaspersky example before, you need to keep up with this. Ransomware is not just one flavor. It is being done by 200 different families of ransomware, and any one of them could come through to your organization. One of the easiest ways to actually stop ransomware is to restrict people from running any executables on their machines. You can do this via Microsoft Active Directory with AppLocker. And I know that you can't just blacklist everyone. I do know of a company that actually did that, blacklisted everyone, and then started to white flag certain people who came through in the organization. And if we can restrict people from running executables in the application data folder, then ransomware is never actually going to install, therefore it's not going to infect the users. Auditing file shares and also permissions. So if users do not need edit access to any file shares or permissions, then restrict them, give them read-only access. As I mentioned before, ransomware's main objective is to go and attack commonly used files, Word, PowerPoints, PDFs, etc. If it's only got read-only permissions, we can't change them. Honey trap and alerting. If you type into Google Varonis ransomware PowerShell, there are some great examples of little PowerShell scripts you can run in your environment. One of the best ones is a honey trap. So we place ransomware targetable files on a share, and the PowerShell script runs in the background and alerts a user once any one of those permissions are changed. Varonis run a really good blog on ransomware with a PowerShell, and again, you can take some of those scripts and place them into your organization today. Back to training users in IT, alerting that ransomware is in your environment is key. You will know when ransomware is, you will know how to identify when ransomware is attacked, because the PNG, the HTML, and the text file will have a created on timestamp. But what you need to be able to do is get that alerted in your environment. These scripts and alerts give you quite a nice way of identifying that. So, it can still happen. As we've seen from the recent example before, there's a day zero attack, only 3 out of the top 50 companies knew. So we need to ensure that our data is protected, we need to know how to respond, and we need to know how to restore. So the first thing around ransomware is payment is never advised. Now I do know of some companies, especially in the UK, which have paid this, but when companies are paying this, they're directly funding them to distribute more ransomware. So we need to ensure we've got backups, replicas, we have got protected data in some way, and we can actually recover from it. One of the biggest things is to isolate the source. Back to the example before, being able to identify this early, isolate the source and control the spread will severely limit the amount of damage which ransomware can do in your environment. And we need to be able to restore. We need to be able to test restores. What happens if I do have ransomware? Let's run ShinoLocker. Let's try and see if we can actually recover from this, and what is our data loss that we're going to have. The last point there, the root cause analysis, is key. You need to know in your organization how it actually got in. Whether it was a specific user with too many admin rights or permissions within your organization, or whether your web filters, your email filters are not up to scratch. We need to know how this came in, therefore how to stop it again in the future. So typical data protection solutions really consist of two elements, backups and snapshots. Now, a backup may run once or twice per day, so we're going to have hours of RPO between them. So in the example on the slide here is I've got 24 hours since my last backup. Now, the worst case scenario, I could stand to lose up to 24 hours worth of my data if I had to restore from that backup. So of course, to mitigate that risk, we traditionally place snapshots on our more key systems to mitigate the data loss in between. One of my customers said to me, if I lost 24 hours of database data, then my company's gone anyway. So they need more aggressive RPOs. And data loss is data downtime. If you have to re-enter that data or your applications are offline, it's causing disruption to your business. Your business is not functioning as it is actually supposed to. One of the key aspects of Zerto is we approach disaster recovery a little bit differently. So we have a journal-based recovery mechanism. And this journal can actually be stored for up to 30 days. And what this allows us to do is to store checkpoints every few seconds within this journal. So I can rewind my applications to just a few seconds ago. So if my PNG, HTML or text file says I was infected at 14:55 on the 1st of March, I could restore it to 14:54 and then therefore minimize the data loss which I actually have. Zerto allows you to recover from a full site outage, an individual application, individual or groups of virtual machines, and pertinent to ransomware, we can also recover from single files. You may not want to completely restore an entire server. This could be a huge file server, 15, 20 terabytes. You don't want to restore all of that if just one directory was infected. We give you the ability to restore those files using the checkpoint technology, therefore minimizing your data loss. So, Zerto Replication, what is it? So, Zerto is hypervisor-based block-level replication. We can work across VMware, Hyper-V. The storage logos there are not relevant in this case. We work with any storage. As long as it's a VMDK or an RDM in your vCenter or Hyper-V, Zerto can see it and replicate it. Therefore, we give you quite a lot of freedom of choice in terms of I can mix protocols, I can mix storage vendors, I can even mix hypervisors going from VMware to Hyper-V and also in the reverse. We provide journal-based replication, as I mentioned before, full auditing and compliance, and typically Zerto is also used for BCDR, absolutely, but because we're agnostic to storage, hypervisor, and also cloud, we work with public cloud platforms, and we also work with our cloud service providers. Zerto's got around 250 cloud service providers who use Zerto to provide disaster recovery as a service due to the fact I can work across different ESXi versions, storage, clouds, hypervisors. And it doesn't matter which solution you're actually using with Zerto. It's been designed from the ground up to have the same operations, whether you're running in the cloud, on-premise, or on hybrid. And it is one solution. And we'll just go a little bit further into the architecture just to show you exactly what Zerto is and does. So in a typical BCDR setup, we would have a production site and a DR site. Zerto can replicate up to 3 sites simultaneously, but for the sake of this slide, we're just going to keep it nice and simple. So I have a vCenter at each side. Zerto can work with a minimum of 1 vCenter. Wherever there's a vCenter, we install one of our management virtual machines. This is a Zerto Virtual Manager. 2 vCPUs, 4 gigs of RAM, and its main job in life, as it states in the name, is a manager. So it looks into the root of the vCenter in this case, and I can see all of the objects nested below it. We then, from the ZVM, can see all of your VMware infrastructure. In this case, we can see all your ESXi hosts, and I can install the virtual replication appliances. These are 1 vCPU, 3 gigs of RAM. They are deployed automatically from the ZVM. All you need to give it is a data store you want to install on and some network information. The VRA is the replication engine of Zerto, allowing us to replicate blocks of data from production to the DR site. We also compress your data as it goes across the WAN as well. And of course, we can also throttle up and down based on your SLAs or priority of your applications. I mentioned before Zerto's doing continuous data protection. We're doing block-based hypervisor block-based replication. So it's always on. There is no schedule to Zerto. It's always streaming the blocks of data as they come through the stack. And of course, we're only interested in the writes which come down from production to the disks below, because they are change blocks and we're replicating it to the other side. Now, just for the record, Zerto doesn't use snapshots or change block tracking. The first place that your data will actually land is in the journal side, in the DR site is in the journal. Now, the journal is created automatically for you, and it's also managed automatically. So you don't have to provision X amount of your storage ahead of time. It's a thin disk. It will grow and shrink based on the change rates of the virtual machine. And you can actually keep this now in version 5 up to 30 days. So we'll be storing blocks of data in there, and we'll be storing checkpoints every few seconds, giving you the granularity that you can recover from. Zerto works across async distances. There is no strict latency requirements, meaning a lot of our customers actually connect very long distances, geos, countries, remote office branches with Zerto. The infrastructure to install typically takes around 60 minutes. Within that time, we will have you up, running, no host restarts, no disruption, and we can start building replication groups and start getting some key items done in your environment, such as failover testing. Now, one way that we actually group your application together is what we call a virtual protection group. You can think of this like a LUN consistency group, but because Zerto is in the hypervisor and we don't integrate with storage, we just see storage as presented into vCenter, then we group at the virtual machine layer. So this saves you having to move your virtual disks into a physical LUN and then encapsulate that in a consistency group. Just to make sure here, Zerto doesn't add anything to your vCenter. This is a Zerto proprietary piece of information. It's our logical grouping. So each site of Zerto can handle up to 5,000 virtual machines. And you can have as many virtual protection groups as you want, up to that 5,000 limit. So my best rule of thumb of this is if you have an application which consists of, say, 10 servers, then place all those servers within that virtual protection group. Because when I recover that application, I can be sure that the checkpoint I recover it to is consistent across all the virtual machines. This aids your data recovery, and it also means that you've got the same SLA for all the servers that comprise that application, not just the key most important parts such as the database. We can set different service level agreements for the virtual protection group, and you can also carry on using your virtual infrastructure as you would normally do. So you can use vMotion, you can use storage vMotion. We don't, or it's not Zerto's designed to inhibit the way that you actually use your virtualization platform today. So I will explain the GUI in a moment. Once we actually get into the software, Zerto is designed to be as hands-free as possible. So it's designed to be simple from the ground up. There's only really 4 operations you can actually do with Zerto. It's designed as a set and forget and just a set and monitor. So we can quickly see from this screen that I've got a 7-second RPO. I can see a lot of green on there, and that green indicates that my virtual protection groups and the SLA I have set are all meeting that SLA. If I have a bad day, it's going to look like this. At this point, Zerto would be alerting me via vCenter alerts and alarms, Zerto emails, and also Zerto alerts and alarms. Now, this event is actually simulating a site outage. Now, that could be my storage array has gone offline, my servers have gone, or maybe even my WAN. At this point, we log into the surviving Zerto Virtual Manager. We select the Live Failover button. I can select one or all of the virtual protection groups. I can select a checkpoint, and I start the failover. So within 4 clicks, I can failover my entire data center. And the first thing that Zerto does is creates the virtual machine in the BCDR site. That creation will be a copy of what it was in production, and then we're attaching the replica disks and also the journal disks on the BCDR site to that virtual machine or group of virtual machines. We can then drop the virtual machine network interface cards into the port groups of your choice. We can re-IP, point to the correct DNS, run scripts before and after, and then also start the virtual machines in the order you specified to boot them up. Now, Zerto has an RPO of seconds and an RTO of single-figure minutes. So Zerto is providing all the automation that you would normally script from a physical LUM-based replication technology to the virtual world. As we're completely baked into the hypervisor, we're giving you that replication and automation. One of the most key points of this is the validation phase. If Zerto, or if you have invoked a live failover, then you are having a very bad day. Zerto will preserve the journal history that you've built up until you validate that you are happy with that point in time. That means if you bring your site up, still got ransomware, you can roll it back with a time penalty of a few minutes. We can rerun the operation with a different checkpoint. Zerto runs a failover test non-disruptively. And by non-disruptively, I mean that production virtual machines are still up and running, and replication is still occurring from production to BCDR. The virtual machines are started up in an isolated network. Now let me be clear here, the isolated network is a decision you make. So when we set up the virtual protection groups, you choose what compromises a testing network for you. So it could be a distributed switch, it could be a single switch, etc. We also build a scratch disk. So the machines follow the same automation as in the top right during a live failover, but we have a copy of them up and running on a different network, and any writes they send are quarantined in a separate area, meaning that we're not going to corrupt your replica disk or your journal. In the case of ransomware, let's just imagine that a file server was infected. I could failover test, again with the same 4 clicks, bring that machine up the other side and just double check that there is no ransomware on there. This would then give me a safe point that I want to actually failover or restore a bunch of files from that server on. Zerto, as I said before, is commonly used for migrations as well, storage refreshes, upgrades, data center moves. Because you can link many sites together with Zerto, the appliances you can download and install anywhere, it means that you can actually move your data around. If it's agnostic to, say, ESXi versions, I don't need to match both of those. I can go from VMware to Hyper-V, different storage to different storage. It gives me a lot of options if my company grows by mergers, acquisitions, or I just need to do migrations onto fresher kit. Of course, if you do fail over, then we have a reverse protect, which means if you have validated the failover and you are happy, then Zerto will replicate any changes you have made in your BCDR site back to your production, and the replication link is set back up again. I mentioned before that you can recover individual files and folders in minutes, and I'll actually walk you through this in the software in a moment. And we do this on a per virtual machine basis, and we're also using the checkpoint technology underneath. Now, this just allows Zerto to be used for more appropriate measures within your environment. When I first started Zerto, people were keeping their journal history for around 4 hours, which I thought was crazy because you'd have a 4-hour window, and if you didn't catch it, then it was overwritten. Consistently now I see people using Zerto for around 5 days journal history. And this is mostly because they can recover single files, I can failover test, I can do live failovers, I can even move and migrate. And I've got all those checkpoints built up in my journal, giving me a lot of granularity in that region. So Zerto serves as the front end for their disaster recovery aspects. It must be noted that when we're recovering individual files and folders, there is no impact to production. We are using the BCDR target infrastructure, and there is no agents within the virtual machine. It is all done by our ZVM and virtual replication appliances. Now, just the end of this slide we're here, I just want to talk through a real-world story. They actually presented with us at ZertoCon last year in 2016. And I can't mention them, but they're a department of private pensions within the US. Now, at this point, a user had been infected, and ransomware CTB locker, as you can see again, is very common, encrypted all the files on user map shares which had edit permissions. Again, that user had a lot of drives mapped to their machine. CTB locker got in, and its main job is to spread and do the maximum damage. So at this point, they're running around, they're trying to isolate everything from the network, and they actually used Zerto Virtual Replication with the file level restore to bring those files back. Now, known fact about this one is they've actually been hit by ransomware 3 different times via 3 different payloads. Just goes to show, even though they've been hit once, they went back, did their root cause analysis, fixed it, and then they got infected another way. As I said before, the first time ransomware does come in, it is a shock, but these guys are now used to it. They've not been infected since. I think they've learned their lesson, but as I said before, please take my recommendations. I will share this slide deck out with the recommendations that we've built up, and we don't want you to be infected with this. It's very damaging. So I'm just going to end this. So this is the Zerto interface. Now what we're actually looking at here is a Zerto Virtual Manager. I'm logged in via a web browser, and this is HTML5 underneath. And it displays results in real time. So I know just by looking at this, as I said before, I have a 7-second RPO. All my virtual protection groups are meeting their SLA. If I just explain my environment here, I've got DC1 VMware, DC2 VMware, DC3 Hyper-V, and DC4 Amazon Web Services. You can link many sites together within Zerto, as I mentioned before, giving you the ability to move your virtual machines and their data on what suits you best for that purpose, or even cost point. I can also see the virtual protection groups, where they're being replicated to, and their individual RPO. Now remember, with the virtual protection groups, I can prioritize one over the others, and I can also set SLAs. To actually create a virtual protection group is very, very simple. The ZVM is simply reading in and looking at your environment, and I can see the virtual machines. I can then select where I'd like to replicate them to, and select individual hosts or clusters and storage I would like to replicate to at the other end. We can also see your individual files, individual data disks, sorry, and we have the ability for marking items down as temporary data or swap. So things like temporary database spaces, they don't need to be replicated because SQL will rebuild it on the other side. We just replicate it once for permissions and file reservation. I can choose where I'd like my machines to start up on a general sense on the port groups. And I can also see the individual network interface cards. And if I just edit the selected, we can see that I can also re-IP for a failover move and a failover test as well. I can have different IP ranges for each one. Building a virtual protection group is as simple as that. Everything is wizard-driven within Zerto to make life as easy as possible. We normally find that most virtualization people can drive this very, very easily because it is very intuitive. We don't need storage, networking, etc. Once you hit done there, Zerto is going to go away and start to build the virtual protection groups and replicate your data from one site to the next. If you already had a copy of your data on the other site, then Zerto could use what is known as a precede function, whereby we just simply read the disks in source and target and transfer only the changes. Now, let's actually do some operations with Zerto. So a failover test is normally quite a large thing. So if I was struck by ransomware, I would want to come through and select the virtual protection groups I wish to protect, select a checkpoint, and start the failover test. Now back to my slide where before, Zerto is then going down to your hypervisor and starting to execute our automation commands to bring your machines up and running in the other side in the least amount of time possible. They start to come up with a suffix testing recovery. So whenever you're replicating your virtual machines from one site to the next, in the target site or the BCDR site, those machines don't exist. We hide them from the inventory. There is no machine created. So there is no concept of shadow or ghost virtual machines. As I mentioned before, Zerto is going to go through its automation steps, and I can actually bring this machine up and then now start to interrogate it. So if I was struck by ransomware on this machine, I've selected my checkpoint, my virtual machines have been brought up to that point, and I can now start to see whether anything is actually infected. You will notice in Zerto, there is no break in replication. We can still see I'm meeting my RPOs. We can just see that we are in a failover testing state. I can stop this at any one time. And the handy thing around Zerto is we produce recovery reports. So everything is logged and audited within Zerto, so such as when a user logs in, when a user performs an operation. In this case here, we've done a failover test, and we can see my recovery time objective is 1 minute 14 seconds, and we also have an audit trail of the steps which Zerto went through underneath to ensure that my machines came up and running on the other side. These are created automatically for you in this section in here, and they will stay persistent across all users. Now, as I mentioned before, with the customer that was infected with ransomware and who was running Zerto, they used the single level file restore. And as I mentioned before, this is done on a per server basis, still using the checkpoint technology underneath, and we're just going to mount a view into that disk. And it should return a directory structure, of whereby I can choose to restore the entire folder, directory, or even single file. When I select download, the file is actually downloaded to my browser session, and I can choose to replace it on the server. At this point in the recovery site, the actual disks are mounted to the ZVM, so you could mount those disks directly to your virtual machine as well, if you wish. The simple fact here is I don't have to use my backup product. I don't have to have agents in my virtual machines. I can restore a single file with minimal data loss and do it in a very slick and easy way. And finally, with Zerto, the live failover, it's the same operations that we've seen with a failover test. We just have this validation or auto commit policy, which I explained before, which will safeguard you in the event of a live failover by preserving your journal history, meaning that you have the option to roll back out of a disaster should you have one. Final few things on Zerto, then I'm going to open this up for questions and answers. Of course, Zerto can throttle bandwidth between sites, either on a permanent or time basis. And as I said, we work across all major versions of VMware. I need to update my matrix on this piece of software. We do support 6.0 update 3 and also 6.5 and 5.5U3. The great thing about Zerto is you don't have to match those ESXi build versions to replicate to or from. As long as the machine hardware version is compatible between both sites, you have the flexibility, which means it saves you a lot of admin trying to upgrade and ensure all sites are the same build version. Zerto is licensed per virtual machine. We don't care how many CPUs or how many terabytes are connected to that machine. It is just a simple counter of how many virtual machines you are currently protecting with the Zerto software. At that point, I'm going to open it up for questions and answers. I think we're just around 15:20 my time at the moment. So if there are any questions, please let me know. I haven't seen any come through on the polls so far.
Hi, Darren. I haven't seen any either, but I did want to ask one that we often get at events like these, which is, what's the lead time to get set up on Zerto? How long does it take to get up and running?
Yeah, sure. So it doesn't, with Zerto, the thing I haven't mentioned is everything can be API driven as well. So between the Christmas and New Year break, I did an install for 400 virtual machines, spread across 40-something hosts. You can imagine, point and clicking with that. We just run scripts to install it. We had him up and running within 2 hours, and within that time, we were replicating data and also doing failover tests. When you compare that to hardware installs, it is a very short lead time to get up and running and see results out of a product.
Excellent. And another one that I often hear is for organizations that have to run failover failback tests for government regulations. Sometimes they have to go, I've heard it called tin cupping to different departments in order to get the proof that the failback test works and the applications are up and running. How does that process work with Zerto?
Yeah, sure. So as I said before with the reports, it's all automated there for you. So the administrator, once you do a failover test like we've seen in the software, the reports are automatically generated for you. You simply export them to a PDF or a zip file, and you can produce those to your peers, auditors, compliance officers.
Excellent. Well, we'll give it another few seconds here to see if any other questions come in. And well, it looks like we're set on questions. Thank you so much, Darren, for taking the time today to review this. I know I learned a lot. And thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.